Welcome to The Future and You. Ideas and opinion about the future based on verifiable facts of today. This episode is for April 2nd, 2014. I am your host, Stephen Ewan Cobb. Our guest today is Gennady Stolyarov II, and our topic is life extension. Gennady has written a new children's book entitled Death is Wrong. The book is available in paperback and Kindle format from Amazon.com. I've read it. It's excellent. Gennady has also created a crowdfunding project using Indiegogo. The goal of this project is to put 1,000 copies of this book into the hands of children at no cost to them. In today's episode, we discuss the book, the project, his views on life extension, and what it might take to win the war against all human death. Gennady Stolyarov II is an actuary, science fiction novelist, independent philosophical essayist, poet, amateur mathematician, composer, and contributor to a number of outlets including Enter Stage Right, Rebirth of Reason, Ludwig von Mises Institute, senior writer for the Liberal Institute, and editor-in-chief of the Rational Argumentator, a magazine championing the principles of reason, rights, and progress. Mr. Stolyarov also publishes his articles on the Yahoo Contributor Network to assist the spread of rational ideas. He holds the highest clout level, 10, possible on the Yahoo Contributor Network, and is one of its page view millionaires with over 2 million views. Mr. Stolyarov regularly produces YouTube videos discussing life extension, libertarianism, and related subjects. And now, on to our interview. Here is Gennady Stolyarov II.
For decades, it has been my personal feeling that all human death is bad, in the same sense that sickness and disease and torture are bad. I see no exceptions. You have written a children's book about this very topic entitled Death is Wrong, and you have started a crowdfunding effort using Indiegogo to raise money to help put the book into the hands of 1,000 children at no cost to them. So let's start at the beginning. What was your goal in writing Death is Wrong, and why do you feel that this book is important?
My goal in writing Death is Wrong is to change cultural perceptions of mortality and the feasibility and desirability of fighting death, fighting senescence, and achieving indefinite lifespans for humans. Over the course of millennia, humans have evolved coping mechanisms with regard to death because over the majority of human existence, the technology just wasn't available to combat senescence. It's understandable that people developed these rationalizations, and they were deeply ingrained in both religious and secular traditions. However, the time has come now when the technologies to actually reverse senescence are on the horizon, and we could achieve indefinite lifespans. But unfortunately, these traditional attitudes persist, and people who grew up with being exposed to nothing else are very reluctant to relinquish those attitudes. So I ask myself, what's the best way to change the culture? And I realize that virtually everybody encounters the grim prospect of death as a child. However, what these children don't encounter is any reinforcement of the very justifiable initial aversion to death. Questions along the lines that I asked when I first found out about death. Why do innocent people deserve to die? Why do they deserve the death penalty? Why do they deserve to cease to exist? And unfortunately, all of the traditional explanations essentially try to convince children either that death is natural or good, or at the very least that it's inevitable, so they should put it out of their minds. They should pursue nearer-term goals and essentially try to pass the time while they can still expect to have a decent amount of it. And I wanted to show children and adults that there is another option, that if they recognize the justified nature of their outrage at death, then they can fight it. They can devote their time to pursuing approaches that would hasten the arrival of indefinite human life extension. And that, I think, is the most important goal that anybody can pursue, because 150,000 people die in the world every single day, and 100,000 of them die of causes related to senescence. So if we can put an end to that, or even greatly reduce that, that would be the most noble, the most humanitarian achievement, the most life-affirming achievement ever in the history of our species.
There are so many different directions I'd like to go with this, but before I do any of those, let me ask you, and I read the book the other day. It's only 99 cents on Amazon in Kindle format. And by the way, I highly recommend the book, although I do wonder about some of the words in the book. Assuming the child is of average IQ, what age is the book designed to reach?
The age range that the book is best for is, for most children, 8 and up. So that is a function of the child's reading comprehension. That is a function of the child's disposition, how eager the child is to think about weighty and somewhat abstract ideas. How interested is the child in science and technology and facts about nature? So all of these vary by child, of course. But in addition to most children ages 8 and up, what I also hope to encompass are the most precocious younger children. I remember myself at ages 4 and 5, and of course I describe a bit of my thinking at those ages in the book, but I would have loved to have that book, especially because I grew up in the former Soviet Union, and there is a very grim history of that entire geographical area that virtually everybody learns at a very young age. So for me, when I learned about the Nazis, when I learned about World War II, when I learned about the extent of possible human cruelty, if I had a book at that age which informed me that it is possible to fight this, that humankind can make strides to get itself out of these historically barbarous conditions, it would have been a great inspiration to me and a great comfort to me. And I ended up assembling bits and pieces of the knowledge that I present in the book over the years, both as a child and as an adult. But it would have been wonderful to have it all in one primer, one that I could have read within an hour and understood. So it really depends on the child. But also, I think the book is great for teenagers and adults who are new to the ideas of life extension, who want some easily digestible way to get into those ideas, a gateway, if you would. At the end of the book, I include some links to other sources of information which interested readers can pursue if they're interested in more depth about the subject. Sources from the SENS Research Foundation to Kurzweil AI to my own compilation of resources on indefinite life extension, where I provide a lot of links both on the theory of transhumanism and life extension and ongoing developments in terms of scientific breakthroughs and research that could pave the way for indefinite longevity.
My own critique on the book is that it's very accessible, I think, for, say, an 8-year-old in the first, say, 2/3 of it. But then when it gets a little more into the science, it would take a child more precocious because, well, words like senescence and metabolism is in there. And that would require a more precocious child. But the philosophy of it is in the first portions, and it's the science that's near the end. And so I think it's a natural progression.
Indeed, and I actually made a deliberate choice to structure the book that way. I put the details of the SENS approach, for instance, into the appendix, and I hint at the existence of these details within the main narrative of the book. But essentially, my expectation is it will be the children who are most precocious, who are most curious about the science, who will go to that appendix and then delve into these matters in greater depth. Essentially, I want this gateway to take children as far as they want to go. If they want to just be inspired by the philosophy, they can start out with that and still benefit a lot from the book. If they want to become longevity researchers themselves later on in their lives, then the book can get them started. And I certainly hope that it will not be their only influence or inspiration, but perhaps 15, 20 years down the road, if they've engaged themselves in that field, they can think back and recognize, oh, this was one of the formative moments that got me into this endeavor.
Before I ask you more about life extension in general as a philosophy and concepts and ramifications, let me ask you, for those who want to help you in this goal, this putting the book into the hands of 1,000 children at no cost to the child, how does Indiegogo work with this project and what steps would they take?
Certainly. So the Indiegogo fundraiser is structured as a flexible funding campaign. There is a $5,000 goal. However, all the funds that are pledged once the campaign ends on April 23rd will be contributed to the effort, irrespective of whether or not we reach the goal. I'm hopeful that we will reach the goal because we've already raised, as of March 29th, $2,665. That's 53.3% of our goal. Now, that will already enable us to give out 533 books. There are two ways to contribute funds. One is via PayPal, in which case the campaign receives the funds immediately. Another way is via a bank card, a credit card, in which case the funds will be made available to us about 15 days after the campaign's expiration. So in the meantime, we have been able to utilize the PayPal funds that were donated to ship out 77 books already. The campaign will have an international reach. So, for instance, we have made shipments to London in the UK, to Warsaw in Poland, to various locations in the US already. And we are very eager to keep the momentum going on the distribution effort as well. So when we do reach April 23rd, whether or not we reach the goal will determine the cut that Indiegogo will take. If we reach the goal, Indiegogo takes a 4% cut. If we do not reach the goal, Indiegogo takes a 9% cut. So it would be nice for us to reach the goal. However, I estimate that there will be a $5 cost per paperback copy to get the book printed via CreateSpace and to get the book shipped. And I am going to stick to that target. That means whatever cuts Indiegogo takes, whatever cuts PayPal takes, whatever processing fees the bank takes, I will absorb those out of my own resources so that the number of dollars contributed divided by 5 will be the number of books that we get out pursuant to this campaign. I am also very interested in getting additional distributors involved in this effort. A book distributor can be any individual or organization that supports indefinite life extension, as long as that individual or organization agrees to distribute the books free of charge to their ultimate recipients. And those recipients could be children, or they can be schools, libraries, children's activity groups, organizations that make the books available to children for public readings or for borrowing. I'm very open to any of those strategies. Essentially, the persons who are interested in becoming distributors need to send me an email to Gennady Stolyarov II at gmail.com with a brief discussion of their planned approach, the number of copies they would like, the mailing address they would like them shipped to, and it's a process that we have tested multiple times already, so we know that it's something we would be able to do pretty much for anyone anywhere in the world.
Yeah, and also for anyone who's thinking about doing it but is maybe unsure because they're not certain about the quality of the book, for 99 cents, if you can find out the entire book because it's available as a Kindle at 99 cents. And you don't have to own a Kindle to read a Kindle book. You can download for free the software that turns your PC or your laptop or your phone, your smartphone, into a Kindle reader so that you can completely check the book out for 99 cents. My next question is a little bit long, so if you bear with me. I do a lot of speaking at different science fiction conventions and a few futurist conventions. And so I get to see people's reaction right in front of me when I describe my notion of life extension. And very often, well, when I describe my vision of life extension to some people, I get a negative reaction that seems almost like a revulsion or disgust, as though it hurts them at a level below language. And so I've come to suspect that any arrangement of words they use to explain their feelings are just excuses, and that their feelings are completely unrelated to the words. That is to say, they're using the words only because they think words are necessary to justify their feelings. And I'm not only talking about people that maybe that are very staid or they're very religiously devout. In fact, one of my friends that I'm on many panels with, he is like me, an atheist. He's not a transhumanist, but he is against transhumanism and against life extension. His notion is that life should end, that it is inappropriate to extend it beyond the natural human life expectation. And he literally is gets, I don't know, emotional whenever I talk about it. I mean, granted, me and him are on good terms, but it's a hot button issue for him. And so I'm wondering, what is your experience with that, and what is your notion about the origin of that and how pervasive it is, and is that a really big problem to be overcome? And really what I'm going for is the problem of educating people about life extension a problem of education, or is it of some kind of negative perception that needs to be overcome?
I think the problem is definitely one of both. In my experience, the people who are more educated about the science and who have looked at the philosophical arguments for life extension in greater depth, who have at least indicated an openness to those arguments, are a lot more receptive to it. Now, the perceptions that you describe very much exist, and I have encountered them frequently myself. And I understand it as a kind of cultural Stockholm syndrome. Nick Bostrom has a great short story, The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant, which I think explains the origins of that mindset. So the dragon tyrant is death. And the dragon tyrant has been taking people away for so long. People have felt so powerless for so long that perhaps they think if they were to acknowledge how wrong it is, how bad their predicament is, it would break their spirits, especially if they don't believe that it's feasible to combat death and reverse senescence and extend lifespans greatly. So I think their resistance arises out of this ingrained mindset that they grew up with and that everyone around them espoused, that death is inevitable. And because they feel defeated in the very attempt to try to combat death, they concoct these rationalizations, and they've been doing it for years because they've been living with this mindset for years. And virtually everything that they've been exposed to has essentially gotten any thought of fighting death out of their minds. Now, it's interesting to also consider that this is a mindset about death in general, about dying eventually, but it's not a mindset about living versus dying on the margin. So even though people hold these excuses and rationalizations for death in the abstract, in practice, virtually everyone wants to live another day, especially people who are still biologically young, who are healthy, who believe that they have something important to contribute to the world or to contribute in terms of self-actualization. They are not going to want to die tomorrow, and they're going to pursue medical treatments if they get sick. And this is a big disconnect in terms of people's attitudes. And different longevity advocates have tried to bridge that disconnect differently. Aubrey de Grey has been making great arguments about living on the margin. If in 100 years from now, one is just as biologically young and active and fulfilled as one is today, would one want to live another day? And the point he tries to carry across is, yes, certainly people would want to live another day, or at the very least, from their present vantage point, it would be irrational for them to speculate that at some remote future date, they would just want to cut off their lifespans irrespective of what happens. But it's, I think, a matter of bridging that disconnect in people to get them to realize that the way they live already, the activities they already pursue, which they recognize to be good on the margin, are also good in a broader, more general sense in terms of the larger goal that they contribute to, which is extending human lifespans, reducing human suffering, improving human health, and eventually achieving indefinite longevity.
Having read the book, it's clear that you wish to live indefinitely. You're willing to live centuries, millennia, with no particular end. And this has been a question that I've brought up on the show a number of times, sometimes with science fiction authors. For example, Kim Stanley Robinson, I asked him, would you be willing to live 300 years? We were talking about life extension at the time. And it sort of blindsided him, but he took the question seriously and tried to answer it. And I asked him, what would you do differently? And so that's what I want to ask you. How long are you willing to live? How long do you wish to live? And what would you do differently now and during the next few years if you knew for certain that you were going to live, say, 1,000 years?
It's a great question. And for the first part, my answer is as long as possible, be it 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 years. I would want to live that long and longer. I think the most important difference in the way I live my life at present would be a longer term orientation with regard to my projects, my endeavors, and I'm engaged in a lot of them. I'm an actuary by day. I'm a writer. I create videos. I compose music. I think the scale of my projects and the time frame of their realization would be greatly expanded because I might not need to worry about essentially showing an end result for everything I do within the next few months or the next few years because of the uncertainty of what might happen afterward. But it's like with compound interest. If you put $1 in the bank and you let it sit there, even at a very modest rate of interest, like 1% or 2%, a few millennia pass and you become a multi-billionaire. So with these kinds of projects, I would hope to have a dramatic impact on the world, which would be realized through my work over a much longer time frame. Actually, it's a good bridge to a lot of the content in the book because I mention opportunities that kids and adults could pursue with indefinitely long lifespans. For instance, interstellar space travel is a lot more feasible. If a spaceship travels even near the speed of light, it would take about 4 years to reach the nearest star system to Earth. So that's a huge chunk out of people's current lifespans, but it might not be a huge chunk out of an indefinite lifespan. So I might be more inclined to explore the universe. I might be more inclined to partake in a wide array of careers. As I mentioned in the book, people could spend 40 years working in one field, then take a break for 10 years, then spend 40 years working in another field. And that would add so much to the richness of human experience, to the ability to understand and appreciate various facets of the world and what people can do to improve their lives. So yes, I would definitely look at the world a lot differently. And I would definitely try to anticipate in more ways than I do today what effect my actions would have 100, 200, 1,000 years from now, to the extent that that's predictable.
I was talking to an insurance agent one time, I guess probably 30 years ago or so. We were talking about the double indemnity part of an insurance policy, which would pay double if you died by accident. I don't know if they're always that way, but that's the way this one was. And he said, but most people don't collect on it because fewer than 2% of the population dies by accident. Everybody else dies by old age, the complications of old age. But if you magnify 2% over many, many normal human lifetimes, currently normal human lifetimes, eventually people would die inevitably by accident if the 2% were to remain the same. First of all, Is 2% of people dying in the populace still accurate? And have you ever extrapolated that forward into an extended lifespan?
So I'm a property and casualty insurance actuary rather than a life insurance actuary. However, I do know, because this is more general knowledge, that the frequency of accidents has been declining. It has been declining in the workplace. It has been declining on the road. Fewer people per capita die in automobile accidents in a typical recent year than would have died in a typical year decades ago, ever since automobiles first came on the road. So there is a very encouraging decline in the frequency of accidents due to the combined effect of technologies that promote safety. We have safer, sturdier vehicles now, as well as a greater safety consciousness in the workplace and among the general population. And I see no reason for that to have a lower bound. In fact, I have written an article called Life Extension and Risk Aversion, which makes the connection between an indefinite lifespan and people's attitudes toward risk. The more a person considers himself to have at stake, to have to lose if some negative event were to happen, the more careful that person will be in the effort to avoid that negative event. Of course, ordinary caution can only take one so far, but technologies can take one a lot further. A case in point is autonomous vehicles. About 95% of all accidents are the result of human error. So if an autonomous vehicle becomes commercially available and a lot of people purchase it, it may be possible to eliminate 95% of auto accidents and fatalities, which would save 30,000 lives in the United States alone every year. And considering that that's just one close prospect that we have, a near-term prospect that companies like Google and Ford and Audi are working on today, we should consider what opportunities we will have in the longer term future to reduce risk. There are big sources of existential risk that are found in nature. The possibility of an asteroid hitting the Earth and wiping out higher life forms, as happened with the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, the possibility of a massive earthquake or a supervolcano or a solar flare. But people with thousands of years to look forward to are going to take these risks more seriously because of the greater probability that one of these remote events will occur during their expected lifetimes. So they'll be very interested in investing in technological solutions, for instance, to redirect asteroids or disintegrate them, try to control the Earth's climate to a greater extent to prevent various climate-related disasters, try to understand seismology to an extent that would be able to predict earthquakes and allow populations to evacuate before one can be expected to occur.
Because it's been a recurring topic on my show, people have asked me what probability I have for my expectation of living an extremely extended life, say centuries or thousands of years. And I usually give them around 25%. I'm much older than you are. I'm 59 years old. And so things would have to come sooner for me than they would for you. What probability do you assign to it? Or have you tried to assign any kind of probability to your own chances for, say, living centuries or 1,000 years or so?
It would be very difficult to do that with any degree of precision. As an actuary, I know that it's sometimes extremely difficult to assign a meaningful probability to an event happening next year. And indeed, a lot of actuarial science is, in fact, about trying to get a grip on a very uncertain future and try to confine that uncertainty within a range. But if you look out decades or centuries, that range becomes so wide and so contingent on the unknown unknowns that it would be extremely difficult to pinpoint a number. Now, there are many factors that would go into influencing that probability. One factor that Aubrey de Grey has pointed out is the level of funding that's devoted to longevity research. He has made a statement recently to the effect that we can reach longevity escape velocity within the next 25 years with adequate funding, but there's about a 50% probability in his mind of that happening because, again, of the unknown unknowns. Perhaps one of the 7 types of damage that he has outlined in the SENS approach may prove to be less tractable than most scientists would expect today. So obviously we can't anticipate that. However, I think his 50% probability estimate is reasonable on the face of it, and considering the extent to which he has delved into the relevant science, I will take him at his word for that estimate. Now, he has also made an interesting statement also about a year ago that in the preceding 10 years, about 3 years of progress at the rate that he would have wanted it to occur have been made toward the goal of engineered negligible senescence. And I had the opportunity to ask him a question at a Google Hangout a few months ago about the implications of that and whether he thinks we will catch up with those 7 years that may have been foregone because of inadequate cultural and public support for life extension research. And what he said was rather encouraging to me because technology progresses in other respects. The Moore's Law phenomenon has continued to hold with computer processing power. For instance, our ability to analyze information may improve to such an extent that we'll catch up with those 7 years, provided that the interest in longevity research continues to increase. And there I'm hopeful too, because mainstream institutions have started to delve into that area to a much greater extent than before. Google's Calico is a great example. I know you discussed that on last week's program. Also, Craig Venter's Human Longevity, Inc. is another new entrant into the field. So serious money, serious minds are beginning to pay attention to this issue. And even Aubrey de Grey has written that he feels vindicated by what Calico is doing. He has been a voice in the wilderness for over a decade, but now the mainstream is finally coming around into embracing the kinds of projects that he would like to see funded on a massive scale.
In pushing the idea of probability, since probability is a very big deal in your profession, and being accurate and concrete is a very big deal because money is made or lost on the quality of the probabilities. But I don't deal with that, and so I can use more rubbery probabilities. And so I have tried to squeeze myself for probabilities by saying, well, do I believe that, say, 200 years from now, that life extension will have been achieved in a massive way? And I would give that almost a 100% probability, provided civilization doesn't fall. And then if I ask myself 100 years from now for the same thing, and it's still pretty close, I'm still maybe 75%, I would guess probability. But these are just guesses, you know. And if I were to say next year, I would say, oh, no. The probability is vanishingly tiny for it to be next year. And so this is the method I use of working out some kind of vague probability. I considered it inevitable eventually. The question is only when. Since you are so much younger than me, let me ask you, have you been doing anything to extend your own life other than just avoiding bad health choices?
Well, it is a good question. I exercise quite a lot. I have a commercial grade elliptical trainer at home. I have run ultra marathons on that machine. My longest run has been for 55 kilometers, and I hope to even extend that in the future. I do a bit of modest weight training. I try to keep myself on task with regard to my exercises. I use a tracking application called Fitocracy, which is very useful. I would highly recommend it. It's free to use for its basic tier, and it allows one to input any of hundreds of exercises that one does, from weight exercises to floor exercises to running, to walking, to yard work, and it computes a point total for each day of exercise. Now, it's probably not a fully scientific approach, but it is extremely useful to get all the exercises to be commensurable with one another so that one could have some sort of measure of progress and a motivation to increase that measure. In fact, before I discovered photocracy, I was developing my own exercise point systems where I would just decide I will assign X number of points to walking per minute, Y number of points to running per minute, Z number of points to this particular exercise or that particular exercise. And I've been refining these systems over a number of years until I discovered photocracy and realized that a dedicated team of people has essentially done an immense amount of work to reach that same goal and to develop a much more extensive system. So that's one of the ways in which I try to lengthen my own lifespan. I pursue other habits in moderation. I try to eat in moderation, a reasonably healthy diet, though, of course, the advice that one receives on diet from various sources, be they nutritionists, recent scientific research, what one hears in the news, is very conflicting advice. And my view tends to be humans don't yet know a whole lot about the healthiest way to eat. We do know some about what is very unhealthy behavior, so I try to avoid that. I don't smoke. I don't drink alcohol. I don't take any other substances, any recreational drugs. I try to be very careful with medicines. I'll use them if they're medically necessary, but if I am healthy, if I don't have anything wrong with me at present, I tend to be very conservative about that. And I am always on the lookout for the best scientific knowledge. If there's a breakthrough with regard to extending human health or with regard to a strategy that could help in that, I'm very interested in that, and I try to read a lot about that.
Public perception is influenced in a big way by movies and TV. Are there any movies or TV shows that give you hope of a better understanding of life extension?
I think there is an excellent film. Let me try to actually look up the name of the film. I forget the name, but it is a film about a 10,000-year-old man who essentially, for one reason or another, doesn't undergo senescence. And he has been around ever since prehistory, but he has had to move around, essentially disguise his identity, undertake different professions and occupations, never stay with the same group of people for much longer than a decade, lest people discover that he doesn't senesce, that he can potentially live indefinitely, unless the fear that those people would exhibit toward him essentially leads to his demise. So it's a very interesting film about this person and his group of friends. I believe he's a college instructor. He gathers them together before departing from them, and he actually starts to hint at who he is. And the film explores the reactions that these various friends experience as a result of his disclosures. But he is portrayed in a very positive way. And the reactions that his friends or former friends, by the time he starts really getting into who he is, exhibit, I think are great illustrations of the prejudices in our culture toward indefinite longevity, the kinds of barriers that we would have to overcome. And I will say the film has a positive ending of sorts, so I'm also encouraged by that. It's one of the best portrayals of human life extension, and I wish I could find the name. I believe I have. It is called The Man from Earth. Yes, The Man from Earth.
Yeah, I've seen that movie and had completely forgotten about it. But yeah, you're right. He discloses to his friends. It's like a gathering in someone's living room or something, and he talks about. At first, he just hints at it, but it's clear he wants to talk about it. And so, as after the hints are picked up on, people, ask him questions about what he's talking about. He eventually completely confesses, pretty much, to what he was leading up to. I wonder if it's an independent movie. It didn't seem to have a big budget, so to speak, a lot of production value.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry right now. The budget was $200,000. So for $200,000, the filmmakers were able to really create one of the most philosophically profound films that I've ever encountered, certainly. Now, speaking of philosophically profound films, there was a crowdfunding effort recently that I contributed to a film called The Last Generation to Die. And that is an ongoing endeavor, but it's supposed to, for the few tens of thousands of dollars that were raised, really push the boundaries outward in terms of both the special effects that are employed and the philosophical importance of the ideas that are discussed. The premise of the film is a woman in a research corporation that is devising these breakthroughs in human longevity, attempts to convince her father to accept these treatments. And there is a philosophical and cultural conflict between this daughter and her father, who doesn't want to accept the treatments and has reconciled himself with a so-called natural death. But the daughter is trying to save his life and preserve him so that she could continue to benefit from his existence and the contributions that he has to offer.
The advantages of living an extended life are pretty obvious to everyone. Not dying sounds wonderful, but also that it gives you the opportunity to do so many more things, complete more goals, have more enjoyments, take more vacations. But also there can be problems, and some of the problems, I'm wondering if we have explored them much, and I wonder if you have. I believe one of your videos concerned the problems that people might experience in living beyond a traditional lifespan.
Well, I have videos regarding the impacts of living beyond a traditional lifespan. For instance, what would the effect be on a person's career? What would the effect be on risk aversion? I even have a video on the second law of thermodynamics and common misunderstandings of that. So I don't specifically mention insurmountable problems of living longer. Now, I will say here that if a person doesn't plan for the future, however long that future is going to be, there may be a disconnect between, for instance, the resources that a person has provided for him or herself and how much time that person actually has. Now, that would be mitigated to a large extent by the fact that a biologically youthful person could go out and earn more resources. So, for instance, right now, there is with some people a problem that they haven't saved enough to provide for their later years because they ended up living into their 90s or 100s, and they never expected that at the time that they were still earning money and putting it away. However, if you have in a situation with an indefinite lifespan a person who is biologically young but chronologically 90 or 100 years old, that person could go back to making money or gaining resources in another way. So that problem would be overcome. I think there would definitely be transformative changes arising out of longer lifespans. So many of the customs, so many of the day-to-day activities that people engage in arise from the anticipation of death or the desire in some way to squeeze something in while one still can. And to me, while some people say that's a sense of urgency that motivates positive human action, to me, it's actually the opposite of that. It's deleterious because it results in suboptimal decision making, and it results in a whole lot of stress and a diminished quality of life. So I think people will need to adjust their expectations. And in the course of the adjustment, there may well be some growing pains, but I'm also confident that every step of the way, even incrementally, it will be a better world, and the changes will be in a worthwhile direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. When human beings think about the future, they usually think about it in the form of planning, and most planning is designed to either achieve some goal or overcome some problem. And so they tend to be very goal oriented. And the goals are designed to fit within the time allotted. And so if they anticipate that they will have more time, then they would alter the prioritization of their different goals. For example, Kim Stanley Robinson, I mentioned a little while ago, when I asked him if what would he do differently if he knew that for certain that he was going to live 300 years, he said that he would change the order at which he wrote novels. He might only write one every 10 years instead of, I think he was writing about one every year or every year and a half. And he said that he would put more care into writing each one so that he would spend more time and more effort on each one. And he literally said not feel a pressure to get them all out. You've written a novel yourself, Eden against the Colossus. So you already know what I discovered when I wrote my first novel, and that is during the process, more novel ideas come to you so that you build up 4 or 5 new novels you want to write before you're even done with the one you're working on. And so the more novels you write, the more novels you could write. And so you end up with sort of a psychological pressure in your mind that, oh, I want to get this one done so I can get on to this other one that sounds so exciting. But all this is involved in future planning. This is all prioritization, time allotment. And so extended human lives would alter that, not just for writers, but I would think, for everyone.
Exactly. And it's interesting that you bring up Eden against the Colossus, because it took me a fairly sizable amount of time to write, several months of work to write that. And I do wish that I could find now a chunk of time that long where I could write other novels and explore other possibilities regarding the future. I wrote Eden against the Colossus even before I became aware of Aubrey de Grey. So my time frames in that novel, where indefinite life extension does play a role, by the way, are a lot more conservative than what Aubrey de Grey has posited as being possible. So at the time, I thought it was science fiction. It was a desirable goal, but I didn't have as much of a confidence that it would be feasible within my lifetime as I do now, after I found out about the works of Aubrey de Grey, Ray Kurzweil, and a lot of other researchers as well. So I really do wish that I had the ability to write more novels, but the pace of life being as it is right now, with this sense of urgency that I mentioned, holds me back in a way. I continue to write and I continue to produce shorter works of intermediate length. And yet, I do wish that I had the opportunity to just take a few months and focus on a larger project like a novel, and know that in the meantime, I wouldn't be losing much of my life, and the opportunity cost would not be nearly as great as it would be today. There is a similar passage in Death is Wrong where I discuss musical composition and how someday I would like to compose more works than Georg Philipp Telemann, the most prolific composer of all time, who wrote more than 3,000 compositions in the 18th century. However, it would take an indefinite lifespan to do that because Telamon was extraordinarily prolific. He focused just on that, and he lived for 86 years, which was quite a long lifespan by the standards of his time. So it is, I think, a great boon to human creativity to be able to live longer. And when a person lives indefinitely, there are so many more avenues that can be explored. And with every one of those avenues, there's a chance of discovering or recognizing something that is truly pivotal and paradigm shifting. And I would really like all people to get that opportunity.
Yeah, you have many different interests. You also wrote a play called Implied Consent. What was that about?
Implied Consent, also a futuristic play, is about a multi-billionaire, actually a biotechnology magnate who, at the age of 95, expires because his heart gives out, and he essentially becomes brain dead. However, in his will, he provides that he is to be kept on life support indefinitely while an artificial brain is developed for him by his company. However, he also has a wastrel son who is essentially attempting to lay claim on his estate so that he could squander all of his resources in essentially destructive activities. So the story is about the conflict between the people who work for this entrepreneur and the son and the attorney representing the son who attempts to use various sophistries and legal maneuvers in an effort to deny this entrepreneur his ability to be revived and to live on. So it is a play about the importance of human life and the importance of respecting individuals' wishes to live longer and the medical arrangements that they make in an effort to prolong their own lives. It will become an increasingly important issue as time passes because the technologies to keep people alive longer are going to increasingly become available. Even in the past week, I've read a story about a plan to take trauma victims who would otherwise die of their injuries, place them into suspended animation to give emergency doctors time to treat those wounds, whereas in the absence of that, those patients would have expired before the treatments could have been applied. And that's an example of a technology that could radically alter the possibility of surviving certain conditions. And yet, if the legal system doesn't catch up to that, and if people's cultural expectations don't catch up to that, then we could have a lot of people dying needlessly. So my play Implied Consent, which was written in late 2004, early 2005, in a futuristic setting, tries to envision essentially what would that debate look like many, many decades down the road. Again, more conservative timeframes than perhaps I would espouse today, knowing the pace of recent progress. But still, I think the ideas are very valuable and applicable to what we can see in the next few decades.
The suspended animation you're talking about, is that the new low temperature technology where the metabolism of the cells is reduced because of the lowered body temperature?
Yes, that is the one. And there's an article on the New Scientist about it, published on March 26, 2014, titled Gunshot Victims to be Suspended Between Life and Death. So the procedure essentially ensures that there will not be major activity within the body, no breathing, no brain activity, but there will still be some cell activity, anaerobic glycolysis, which means the body is still doing something. The body is still alive at some low-key level. And that level is such that the rate of decay is slowed down greatly. It gives time for the doctors to operate and fix the damage. So it's a very interesting premise, and I am very glad that mainstream medicine is coming to adopt that. Essentially, this isn't even an effort motivated by philosophical considerations such as reaching greater longevity, or as in the cryonics movement, preserving people for a very long period of time until treatments become available. This is motivated by more day-to-day practical considerations where a large proportion of the general public can be on board with something like that. And I think in addition to the activism that we do, efforts like this can lead the kind of world that we desire in terms of indefinite longevity to sneak up on people. As long as people are receptive to each incremental breakthrough, and in the meantime we work on the philosophy, on the cultural perception, those will converge. And hopefully within our lifetimes, we'll see a world where these treatments become routine, and they're seen as no more objectionable than getting an antibiotic today or getting heart surgery today.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually in use, but I've heard it's been proposed that EMT units, ambulance teams, have the ability to lower a person's body temperature as they're bringing someone to the hospital, simply to stabilize their condition. My understanding is that if the body temperature is lowered, of course it's not to a freezing point, but it's lowered pretty close to that it doesn't matter if the person's not breathing, it doesn't matter if their heart's not beating, the tissues throughout the body would then remain alive, and once the damage is repaired, then the person's body temperature could be raised and they would be brought back to a normal state of health.
That would be very welcome, I think. And it really does highlight that death is not really such a bright line as perhaps many people think. Many people think it's an on or off state. You're either completely alive or you're completely dead. In fact, throughout history, the legal definition of death has shifted based on the ability of doctors using the best scientific knowledge of the time to bring people back. If a person's heart stops today, they're not necessarily dead. They could be resuscitated. However, if 100 years ago a person's heart stopped completely, they would most likely be considered dead because there wasn't an ability to bring them back. So this is very encouraging in terms of reversing more types of damage, which would essentially enable the line that is considered irreversible death to keep being pushed back. It's another way by which we can make progress against the perils that threaten us.
In the 50s, a computer cost millions of dollars. Now they're given as birthday gifts to grade school children. Do you believe that the technology of longevity will go through a similar price pattern over time, from vastly expensive to affordable for everyone, say in the middle class or maybe lower middle class?
Precisely. I do think this is the trajectory that all technological breakthroughs follow, and Ray Kurzweil has explained it brilliantly in his books, in particular in The Singularity is Near. The earliest generations of the technologies are quite often extremely expensive. They're cumbersome. They don't work very well. And the way I like to see it is the early adopters of these technologies, who are often also quite wealthy, well off materially, are essentially test subjects for how well those technologies would work. And they are to be commended for taking these technologies on when they are so expensive and unreliable. At the same time, their feedback and the general public interest in the technology fuels both improvements in how the technologies are produced and designed, and it fuels consumer demand, which leads more companies, more individuals and businesses to be interested in producing more of them in more reliable ways. So we've seen that with cell phones, we've seen that with computers, as you pointed out, we've seen that with internet access, and I think we're going to see that with biotechnology and nanotechnology. This is why I don't put much stock in the argument that indefinite longevity will only be the preserve of a tiny, wealthy elite that will control all of us because they will live indefinitely and the rest of us won't. Well, it may well be that the first people to get these treatments will be extraordinarily wealthy individuals. However, I wouldn't necessarily want to put myself in their shoes. If I'm still relatively young at the time that this happens, I would rather that some older billionaire be one of the first to receive these rejuvenation treatments. And if they succeed, great. He will have been one of the pioneers that paved the way for us all. But if they fail, and there's a lesson to be learned from that, I would rather be the beneficiary of that lesson than the person on whom that lesson was learned. So ideally, I wouldn't want to be part of the first generation to receive those treatments. I would want to be part of the second or third generation to receive those treatments. Though if I have to be part of the first generation to receive those treatments, it would still be better than nothing.
I think a shining example of that right now is Peter Nygard. Have you heard about his work in the Bahamas?
I have actually just seen a headline about that a couple of days ago. I haven't read very much into that, but I've actually bookmarked it. So I'm interested in finding out more.
Let me go ahead and describe it. I watched, there's a video, runs 5 or 10 minutes, I guess, in which it's described very, very thoroughly. He's behind the production of the video, so it's, you know that it's the inside dope rather than some outsider speaking of what they think is going on. Let me start a little farther back in time, though. I met Peter Nygard at the Singularity Summit, I believe it was, in New York City in, I forget what year it was, 2009, 2008, something like that, and interviewed him very briefly for the show. At the time, he was a very wealthy man, Canadian, or that's where his businesses are, and he may be a naturalized citizen now. He's from Sweden or Norway. At any rate, he was a clothing designer and built a great fortune from that. He's worth pretty close to $1 billion nowadays. And recently, he has put his money behind stem cell research and put himself forward as a guinea pig. And he has built a facility, a medical facility in the Bahamas, and he has lobbied the Bahamian government, to pass laws making it legal to do the research and the experiments that they're doing, so that they have taken some of his skin cells, Peter Nygard's skin cells, and turned them into stem cells, so that they are approximately equal to, what do they call, embryonic stem cells. And he is undergoing a treatment where he is injected with stem cells into his bloodstream, which then travel through his body and take up residence and fortify the tissues where they land. And of course, they become differentiated into the type of cells that they are surrounded by. He's been going through this for, I believe, several years now, and is very pleased with the results. The video is available online. His last name is Nygard, Nygard, I believe is how you spell it. I just learned about it days ago, so I don't know a lot about it, but apparently it's an important experiment that's going on with the specific goal of life extension, and I believe it's worth looking up more about it.
Most definitely, and I will certainly be reading more about it in the coming days. Perhaps we are already starting to see those pioneering billionaires who are going to volunteer themselves to be the test subjects of these rejuvenation treatments. And I hope that they work out for him, because if they do, that will definitely change the way life extension is viewed by the general public. It's also very interesting that he's trying to do that in the Bahamas. It relates to the topic of a recent article that I published titled "Putting Innovation to a Vote, Majoritarian Processes versus Open Playing Fields." And the argument that I make in that article is innovation thrives best in what I call an open playing field. A new field where individuals can think of new ideas and implement those ideas without encountering a whole lot of obstacles from ingrained special interest groups or institutional arrangements. So it's interesting that Peter Nygard thought that his chances would be improved if he were to go to the Bahamas, where perhaps not as much legal or political or institutional baggage has been built up that would have made his efforts very difficult, tied them up in bureaucracy or tied them up because of public resistance to those efforts. There, it seems like he can just go ahead and do it and show the results, whether or not he succeeds. And based on those results, people can judge the desirability of his approach, and perhaps even in environments where the institutions are more established and more rigid, some of his insights could then be taken and applied, even though they could have never originated in those more rigid environments in the first place.
Yeah, agreed. I also think, and I imagine you agree with this, is we need many different approaches, many different experiments.
Absolutely. It's always, I think, important to recognize that any given approach has some risks, including the risk of not succeeding. So just as we would want to diversify in any of our endeavors, we would want to diversify in terms of the pursuit of life extension, not putting all our metaphorical eggs in one basket.
And if someone wanted to learn more about life extension and also more about your work, what are some of the resources you would recommend?
Well, my own online magazine, The Rational Argumentator, at rationalargumentator.com, is the central hub of my work. Virtually all of my articles and videos are made available through The Rational Argumentator. They are also made available on a variety of other sites. I write articles for IEET, the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. I've published articles on the Wave Chronicle, the Mises Institute, Les Québécois Libres, which is a Canadian publication in Quebec. And furthermore, on the Rational Argumentator, I have a page titled Resources on Indefinite Life Extension. The acronym for that is RILE. People can find it from the main rationalargumentator.com page. And this has been my attempt over the past 2+ years to compile free resources, papers, articles, videos on both the feasibility and the desirability of indefinite longevity. So there I link to news stories, I link to essays that are foundational to the philosophy of transhumanism, I link to videos, both my own and those of others. So those would be great places to start. And of course, Death is Wrong. I would want to mention that again because I think it is the most influential of my works today, and I really hope that anyone who's interested in life extension or even wants to consider it will acquire a copy of the book, either in paperback or in Kindle format. As you mentioned, the Kindle version is very inexpensive at 99 cents, and contribute to the fundraiser and distribution effort, which is on Indiegogo.com, called Help Teach 1,000 Kids That Death is Wrong.
Excellent. I appreciate your taking the time for the interview.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stephen. It was great talking to you today.
That was Gennady Stolyarov II. Gennady Stolyarov is spelled Gennady, Gennady, Stolyarov, Stolyarov, and the second is usually abbreviated with 2 capital I's. You can learn more about him, his work, and some of today's topics using the links I've placed in the show's blog post, which is located at thefutureandyou.libsyn.com. Libsyn is spelled Libsyn.
That's it for this episode of The Future and You. This program is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivative Works 2.5 license. A copy of this license may be viewed at creativecommons.org. Briefly, this means you may, indeed you are encouraged to, copy this entire program as many times as you wish and give it away to as many people as you wish. But you may not copy only a portion of this program, you may not charge anyone any amount of money for it, and you may not use any portion of it to make something new. On the other hand, anyone whose obvious goal is to recommend the show to others automatically gets special dispensation. Offline reviews, which include the show's website, may include brief quotes. And online reviews, such as for a blog or community group or web page, which provide a conspicuous link to the show's website, may use as many quotes as they wish, up to and including a transcript of 1/2 of any interview. The show's theme music is a blues number called Some Sympathy by Chris Jurgensen and is from his album Big Bad Sun, which is available at magnatune.com. Magnatune is an independent record label that sells its catalog of music through online downloads and print-on-demand CDs. The company allows artists to retain full rights to their music and splits equally with an artist all the revenue from the sale of their work. All the music at Magnatune may be previewed free of charge, and customers can even choose how much they want to pay for the music, with pricing ranging from $5 to $18 per album. You can learn more about them at magnatune.com. That's spelled magnatune.com. If you have a theory or opinion about what the future will contain, be it the near future or the far future, you may email it to me at thefutureandyou.com. That's thefutureandyou.com. You may also suggest topics that you would like to hear discussed, or send contact information for experts that you feel might provide valuable insights into the future. Mind you, an expert is not necessarily someone with an impressive degree. The best experts are the people who live or work or strive in the area under discussion. If the subject is science or medicine or academia, a degree is important, but if the discussion concerns trends in construction or firefighting or video gaming, a degree is pretty much meaningless. To get the inside dope, you've got to find the people who actually do this stuff every day. They are the first to see the trends because the trends have already begun changing their lives. As to the topics we will explore in the next episode of The Future and You, I can make no guarantees. Interviews are still being sought, recorded, and edited. All I can promise is that we will ruminate on the future. To learn more, check the show's website at thefutureandyou.com. If you enjoyed the program, please mention it to a friend, and be sure to join me again next time. Until then, I have been your host, Stephen Ewan Cobb. On behalf of myself and all my guests, I thank you for listening.